Very much. So as we bring Hilary in virtually, which we can start doing now, otherwise she's sitting in a waiting room waiting for us. As Gay mentioned, the sort of protocols, framework, rules around programmatic and how it actually works is overseen by the IAB Tech Lab. You're going to hear a little bit more about them, the organisation that they are and how supportive they are, and in particular, really good with us. We really enjoy a good relationship with them. We connect with them on a weekly or fortnightly basis on a number of things. And it's been great to have Hilary join Tech Lab the last 9 to 12 months. And she doesn't know it, but she's now my favorite product person there because she's in charge of all the cool stuff, Open RTB and the Green Initiative, sustainability, which is a big deal amongst many other things. So Hilary, I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself, and Hilary's going to give a little presentation, and then we're going to have a Q&A. And please do get involved with questions, and take it away, Hilary.
Thank you so much, JJ. And for those in the room, please don't believe a word. I am Hilary Slattery, and I do lead up the Programmatic Supply Chain Working Group, which is responsible for the Open RTB spec, which includes, as of November of 2022, digital out of home. So I'm going to just share my screen quickly and just take you through a few slides. I promise it shouldn't be too painful. Oh, whoops, sorry. Let me just go into presentation mode. So before I get into the specifics, a little about IAB Tech Lab. So IAB Tech Lab is a member-driven organization that leads over 200 working groups across 750 different companies focused on engaging its global member community to drive foundational technical standards that enable growth and trust in digital media. So where you all work with JJ at IAB on the policy front, JJ will then turn to me for operational support of those policies to put in place. So through creating an agreed upon shared language, IAB Tech Lab increases the speed to market and lowers operational costs to help mitigate risk in the programmatic ecosystem. Our foundational Open RTB specification is the backbone of open market bidding, and we continue to drive innovation through programs like ads.cert, OMSDK, and digital out of home, among many others. So as I mentioned, in November, we did release what's called official spec support for digital out of home. And really what any signal in the OpenRTB specification is meant to do is to standardize the way that sellers and buyers communicate. So until this was released, each implementation of digital out of home was bespoke to the implementer. So it was a bit different across every combination of buy and sell side. And what this does is it accounts for, and those signals were sent, but they were sent kind of shoehorned into other objects in the OpenRTB spec. And what this did was move it out of extension land and give it its own place to account for some of the very specific things to digital out of home. I'm not going to bore you with code, I promise. But it can be used, any of these signals that are now available can be used by any implementer. In fact, we certainly hope you will. And we did create these signals in conjunction with trade organizations and large publishers, but it is a living document. So anytime you need to, if there's a signal that you think would be helpful, I'm always here to help. Reach out and we can work on, a proposal together. And yeah, those are all my slides. So I tried to make it as painless as possible.
Yeah, no.
And I'll go.
I think I absolutely agree. I think that's good. So we can just get into the questions, Hilary.
Yeah.
And a couple of points. Look, first of all, I don't pretend to be an out-of-home expert. I've been a digital nerd from the beginning. So I actually.
Nor do I, JJ.
Yeah, but I'm very curious about some of the aspects of it, and it's been interesting to see the protocols extend into and incorporate out of home. And actually, it's worth mentioning that very kindly Tech Lab shared the draft of those specifications with us here in Australia early, so the working group could get to look at it, at least be aware of it, be cognizant of the direction it was going in, and provide some feedback, importantly. So the way in which Tech Lab are now doing the releases are far more fluid, it's far more iterative, it's not like big chunky 6-monthly releases. So staying on top of it through us and having access to Hillary is sort of the idea. We're all in it together collaboratively. Now, we talked a little bit, so you mentioned some of the nuances of out of home and there being a lack of standardization. So what are some of those specific considerations that you had to take into the work done by Tech Lab? Do you have some examples that are particularly interesting of how it's a little bit different and how you had to sort of be a little more flexible for the protocols?
Yeah, absolutely. So digital out of home is fascinating for quite a few different reasons. The first thing was that, while there are quite a lot of standard display sizes or video sizes in digital and CTV, digital out of home, the variance of ad sizes within digital out of home is just fantastic. It can be everything from a billboard in Times Square to a small taxi topper to a bus station and everything in between, which I knew it, but I didn't realize how many different iterations there could be until I kind of started getting into things with the group. The second sort of thing here that is you can actually have a fraction of an impression in digital out of home, which neat. And, one ad play with multiple viewers can either be greater than or less than one, and sort of the way that we've implemented the signals to account for that. And probably lastly, the thing that I loved about this was that because the internet connections in the actual billboards aren't persistent, we needed a way to run the auction and then also communicate this is about how long we think the gap will be, and then communicate back, this is when your ad actually has rendered. It's amazing to me that they figured out basically how long on average that differential is, and also enough to stand up a signal to send that to the buyers.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, isn't it? There's sort of the delivery and then the billing signals. Isn't there a 2-hour window, I think, or up to a 2-hour window that can be incorporated to make it work, which is very smart.
Yeah, and it's up to the implementers to say what sort of gap that they'll accept, but the 1 to 2 hour window is roughly what I've seen.
Yeah, and that shows real flexibility, right? This is a real-time bidding, but providing that flexibility for a new format and environment shows the work that can be done. You don't have to think so narrowly, and that's particularly exciting. And I'm with you on some of the first time I incorporated sort of, I'm used to sort of ad units or ad calls and inventory being quite limited, and suddenly street furniture, the explosion of opportunities and the environments and locations are amazing. From petrol stations to obviously your bigger billboards, but even elevators and fitness first environments or whatever. I found that very interesting. So when you were looking at some of the nuances, I know that there's been some almost unintended positive consequences of the work done in terms of the flexibility that's starting to impact and improve the wider programmatic ecosystem, right? Do you have some examples of those for us?
Yeah, I sure do. So the example that I just used around being able to signal the delta of time between when an auction ran and when an ad delivered, as we were digging into this, we actually realized that this is extensible to server-side ad insertion, which is quite popular for CTV. I think in the US, it's a little over 50% right now, which it makes a ton of sense. And we've actually released that macro in the newest version of OpenRTB to signal the timestamp of ad rendering. And I think probably an even better example and even a larger example is during the release process, there was an attribute called e-time. And as we were digging into the specifics of how e-time works, which is basically meant to signal how long the creative will be rendered on the page, we realized how many other players, literally the entire programmatic supply chain, wanted a signal, not only for digital out of home where it probably makes quite a lot of sense, but also, do display ad units change and how long will they do and what's the trigger for those things? So we actually, in the March release that is coming out of public comment, we actually created 2 new objects specifically to support just does this refresh and how often and what are the triggers? But that really kind of blew me away was all the conversation around that.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, sort of the different environments for advertising coming together and benefiting from one another is wonderful to see.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, down here in sunny Australia, there are times when we want to know how special we are, and if we're ahead of the game, we always feel like we're a little bit behind it in some ways, which I don't think is true. We're just different. In some areas, we're actually more advanced. In some areas, we may take our time a little longer. So I was wondering, as you engage the global IABs, there's 47 of them, I think, that there are in total, how have the adoption of these standards for out-of-home been? How popular are they? Are you getting a similar level of engagement in other markets? I mean, I'd assume in the US and the UK. I know it's a pretty hot topic, but have you got any stories in terms of the global adoption and appetite?
So IAB Tech Lab doesn't actually track implementation, like in a technical way, not in a way that we crawl. Certainly the most leaned in markets are US and UK. But I would love to hear more from other markets, specifically Australia, that is all like a top 10 more advanced market that may do things just slightly differently than things are signaled in the US and the UK. We were quite careful to work with digital out of home, like trade organizations, to make sure that any spec that we created was going to be extensible to every market. But again, if there is, I'm nice, reach out. If there are signals that are missing or can be added, we are more than happy to have that conversation and propose. Actually, someone from the UK just reached out around doing something to support what's it called? Like direct, like programmatic guaranteed deals for digital out of home, which is something that we'll be working on in the very near future.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think with some of the projects that we have globally, there is obviously global alignment. It's nice to check in with the working groups in other markets and see what's happening. But you are actually saying that we're really special and you can come down and see us and see the beaches and stuff, right?
Australia is on my bucket list, actually. I would love to come down.
Excellent, excellent. And I love the industry body piece. So obviously us here doing a joint event with the OMA is significant. And we do in digital spheres work closely with other industry bodies on some standards and particularly privacy right now. And actually on that topic, there have been some assumptions in and around, particularly with the privacy review that's starting here in Australia. So we're in the thick of it with proposals to respond to, there's about 120 of them, which you'll hear a bit more about at the event, attendees. There is an assumption that there's not necessarily an exposure to the shifting consumer privacy legislations or even tech limitations in terms of signal loss. Do you have any specific thoughts on this, particularly in relation to privacy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say even if there's not regulation, no one is immune to privacy concerns. I do think that, what I mentioned above about how the digital out of home implementations typically use private IP networks, which does create that walled gardens, but it also prevents a lot of sort of fraud risk vectors, and DSPs aren't able to determine location in the way that they're used to doing it programmatically. Theoretically, that's going away. Like the browsers are removing that, but it is still a signal that's there that digital out of home isn't facing. What I said, though, I will reiterate, no one is immune here. Like, because the nature of digital out of home is that lots and lots of people see the same ads, even something as seemingly as innocuous as, say, a zip code or a postcode, that gives a ton of information about the people who are walking past that ad. So, there's still an information like, are you a homeowner, race, ethnicity, all of those things. So it's a non-zero risk. And other than that, I think it really depends on the implementation, right? So if there's a QR code, say that someone scans on a billboard, be super cautious and make sure that any advertisement that you let run like that with the QR code is someone that is an extremely trusted partner. Because if someone scans a QR code and downloads malware, you're in the crossfire. So it's, it is, the legislation, at least as I understand it, isn't coming specifically for that, and it's guarded in many, many ways, but there is still risk involved.
Yeah, no, and that's so the stage that we're at is reviewing the general topics that we want to push back on. I mean, the definitions of personal information, for instance, some of the restrictions and proposed limitations around geo. And the plan is that once we've gone through this initial submission and feedback phase, we can then dive into the more specific environments where we'll have to have more detailed feedback, and that will include out of home.
Certainly, and certainly like brand safety suitability, right? So if you run an ad maybe outside of a gym, that might not be, if it's an ad for a candy bar, that might not work as well, right?
Yeah. And another part is the protection of children. So the mechanics of targeting, then we need to go through. There's some misunderstandings from the government there, both in terms of suppression and targeting, but also to protect children in certain messaging and screens in certain environments does take some technical nous that they may be limiting. So there's some considerations there immediately. And I know in the US, you've
absolutely, and also just ring fencing, right? So the way that location data, my understanding of the way location data works, you're typically relying on a partner that you hopefully trust to say this is like a children's play place or a park where children go to. What happens if that partner is incorrect, right? And it's something else.
Yeah. Well, some of the best feedback we've had are from some of those data partners that luckily 2 or 3 of them in our data council are based in Europe, particularly in the UK. So the feedback and case studies we've had from them are very relevant because they're functioning for GDPR. And I know in the US you've had now the setup for now 6 different states that have implemented slightly different varied legislation already. So you know that very well.
Yeah, I think 7 as of today, actually.
Right.
But to your point, like when the privacy laws, and then also in conjunction with the like child protection laws, that creates quite a different, order of magnitude, right? That we need of complexity that we need to be prepared for.
Yep. So we have a couple of other questions, but I do want to check with the crowd here. They're looking eagerly at us, Hillary. They look excited. Do we have any questions?
Do they? It's quite early there, isn't it?
Well, it's actually quite civilized. We normally get going before 9 and we shove coffee in them. So we've been a bit more relaxed today because it is an all-dayer. So we started at 9:30. It's not too bad. Do we have any questions on Slido or just generally for Hillary on anything specific? No. All right. So a big piece of... Was there a hand? No. A big piece of work that's happening here is in relation to sustainability. I know that you're involved, now is my new favorite product person there, Hillary. You're involved in the Green Initiative, I think it's called, which we're looking to incorporate in some of our framework here. We're trying to keep it very pan-industry with agency, vendors, and publishers. Now, in terms of the Green Initiative working group you've got at Tech Lab, what aspects for out of home are there worth bringing up? I mean, you've got these giant connected digital screens for a start. What stage are you at, and are there any pointers for out of home that you could perhaps provide? It's a really long question, sorry.
That was quite a long question, but thank you. And I do love this question. So one of the deliverables of the sustainability working group this year is going to be like publishing programmatic best practices. So these will mostly apply to traditional digital advertising, like lazy load your page to make sure you don't run non-viewable ads, things of that nature. But I do think for digital out of home, including things like a lean creative, right? If you have a LED billboard, that's just going to be better for the environment. I think it's the nature of digital out of home because it is essentially on device, or like it's much closer to on device than what we see in traditional programmatic. There's already a leg up, but there's certainly, there are questions around, make sure that your billboard is plugged into an efficient grid and things like that I think certainly pertain specifically to digital out of home, or that at least that digital out of home can sort of help us move forward with, because of the fact that the nature of the ads are like they're used to doing things in an environment that don't have the same amount of signal that traditional sort of programmatic buyers are used to. And I think that's a great thing for privacy, for sustainability, for all these things, because simply like less signal means that you need less energy to run those ads and run those auctions.
Yep, that makes sense. It's interesting, isn't it? And as you say, the starting point for us with our standards and guidelines council is to review something that we reviewed about 5 years ago, which is the assets and guidelines in relation to file assets.
I'm so sorry, you're breaking up a bit. Can you say that again?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. So we have a standards and guidelines group here that will review the, and we haven't done it for about 5 years, that will review the best practices in relation to the assets that kind of go into the pipes, as it were, and everything that's shoved through ad tags, which we did a few years ago. But I must admit, we didn't take into consideration out of home at the time. So that's going to be an interesting dimension to that review, which we'll be undertaking, aligning to the new ad portfolio. So just it's something to call out to industry. We will be doing that fairly soon. I assume that's something that's also part of the discussions in terms of best practices that you're having in the US.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually will call out that the digital out of home sort of community is awesome to work with. I do have some other, in my work with some of the other, I hate to use the word tangential, so please forgive me, everybody in the room, but some of the sort of smaller programmatic inventory pools, the working with them is a bit, digital out of home is just always excellent to work with. They understand the spec, they understand the technology, they're willing to lean in. And it's just been, that has not been my experience with everybody else, like other participants. And it's just been a fantastic group of humans and experts and ed tech people.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, we're not just saying this because of the crowd, or maybe I am. No, I'm not. So with audio, for instance, and there are times with TV, that sort of, that you can call it different worlds, not old and new, coming together has not been always an easy ride. Whereas the willingness for out of home, I think, to evolve, particularly here in Australia, the amount of digital connected screens, the investment, the commitment, the willingness to be innovative is heartening. So I'm actually looking forward to the process and incorporating this environment in those discussions. So
yeah, I could not agree with you more. It's kind of like with the digital out of home, it's a great position because kind of the spec is evolving alongside, in tandem with the tech, which is just fantastic. So it's really just a group of fantastically curious, kind, wonderful people who are willing to lend their expertise to anybody who cares enough to learn or can use it, right?
Right, we've buttoned them up enough, I think. So in terms of the green work, and I'm interested in the sort of ad decisioning, auction-based environments where there's some work going on. How are we proceeding there? I know you're working with Scope 3 and AdNet Zero in the US. Can I just ask just general progress? Because I'm very curious myself now. It's just turned into a chat with me and Hillary.
Yeah, no. This is fantastic. No, I'm into it. So we have Scope 3 has joined the Tech Lab board. They are a working group member. We also have 2 other sustainability vendors in the working group. And it is quite important to me to make sure that there is proper representation from across the industry and not just, one sustainability vendor. We have SSPs, DSPs, direct publishers. I would love a digital out of home set of eyes in that group if you'd like. It's at 11 a.m. every other Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern every other Wednesday. And we are really looking to communicate to the market, these are things you can do today while we wait for, say, emissions numbers to be calculated. Tech Lab is not going to be in that business. We're going to leave that up to the sustainability vendors and their publishers. But what we can do is make an assumption that says less signal equals necessarily means less energy. So how can we find ways to make those ad calls lighter, to make ad delivery better, make creatives lighter, all of those sort of technical work streams. And as much we have a fantastic sort of representation. You can see all of the participants on the Tech Lab website, but always open to more. I love it when I get a request to join the sustainability group.
Yeah, look, thank you. I think I am on those meeting calls. I haven't turned up at 3 a.m. yet, but
fair.
But we are swapping notes, and that's the most important thing. And we've got an active group here. So anyone in the sort of more traditional out-of-home environment that's keen to get involved, please do. I know that the vendors that are supporting you are involved, but it's a project that we want to kick along pretty swiftly here in Australia. And I really thank you so much for all your support, Hillary, on a number of topics. I'm going to check in with the audience if there's any more questions for you. And if not, we'll move on. Do we have one? Come on. Anything on Slido? Yeah, Gay, our CEO, is now telling off the crowd. This is how we treat our attendees at our events, Hilary. You'll be impressed.
Fantastic.
Well, look, thank you so much. We have to get you over to Australia at some time soon. And thanks again for all your support. Give Hilary a round of applause, people. Come on.
Oh. It's quite early. I won't take offense.
Right. See you. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening.
Cheers. Thank you, everybody.